Okay, so this is maybe an intermission type of video where we're going to try and crystallize that concept that we're talking about in the last video around um, how React, and specifically their useEffect React hook, allows us to deal with complex state transitions. I like to think of it almost like a cascade of changing states throughout the application and handle it quite elegantly. So this is a block explorer that I'm working on now called Block Expo. In a few months, I'll open source this, and you'll be able to use it with your local Ethereum blockchain. So, if you're running Ganache locally, you'll be able to use this and get a real connection into um, seeing your blocks and transactions, and be able to search your local development instance, which should be useful. Okay, so quickly, this has a real-time type of component here that was running just now. Shows you what block you're at. It has normal things you expect in Block Explorer. Be able to see the blocks. Right now, it's connected to Loom's Plasma chain. So some things that need to kind of be fixed up. So I'm doing an overhaul right now of how it works, the way it's connecting, and the way it's dealing with blocks and transactions. But generally, it's in pretty good shape. So one other thing you can do here with this is you can connect to other blockchains, and I'll add in the Ethereum blockchains as well. So probably just local. I think I'll leave it to local, so we're not hammering the production blockchain. So this will probably just change just to local Loom, and then probably a Ganache. Okay, so let me just go through quickly how it works. So look at the index. So when you hit the main page, you go to this mixed explorer, which mixed in the sense that it's blocks and transactions together, styled a bit like Etherscan. Etherscan was the inspiration of it. So see a bunch of imports here, components we're bringing in, normal hooks for states being managed here. So because it has a real-time mode, it runs that real-time mode for a couple minutes, and then it turns that off. So here, these are some values to help it run that real-time mode. And then this is where it starts to get interesting. So there's a cascade that's happening here. So the connection is picked up from what you've stored locally when you press save. So we have a local Loom instance running here. So if we were just to switch this to local, you'll see that the block height will change, switch to local. There's no transactions in the last 50 blocks right now, so for local, so we won't see any of that, but you'll see that it'll load those blocks. So if we go back to the Plasma chain, the same thing will happen. So it'll go back to Plasma. It will then load the last block height there, and then when you go to the main page, it'll load all the blocks and transactions. So what's happening is a few things. So one thing, the connection itself is a hook. I'll show you that. So it's as a hook that it's checking the local storage to see if you saved a connection recently or getting your last one. Then it loads that. But once it loads that, then the next hook is actually dependent on the connection. So it's waiting in a sense, or it's dependent on the connection. If this changes, then this hook runs. So once you get a new connection, or any connection, it's then going to go and it's going to connect to that blockchain. And then these hooks then become dependent on that. So there's essentially a cascade. So here, if block height changes, then this hook will run. This hook will then go and get to blocks. If the blocks ever change, then this hook will run and it will go and get the transactions. And then here, these hooks are a little bit more complicated, but we have a hook that watches block height. So it will wait for the block height. So while that real-time thing up here is on, it's real-time, it's going to be running and getting blocks and transactions. When that is on, then this will use an interval, a use interval hook. So it will then run as long as this is on and as long as we've told it to run with our parameters. And then this will then get blocks on block height. So this has a bunch of parameters here. If you set them, it'll then use them to go and fetch blocks for as long as you want it to. And there's a bunch of things around. The different blockchains will have different numbers of transactions. So for example, you'll expect the production block chain to have many more transactions per block versus your local or a test net will usually have less. So there's some parameters there you can set for grabbing those. The interesting part, I think, for this discussion is more around these hooks. So this hook runs whenever the connection, we're using Web3 now, this will probably change to Ethers, but whenever the current block or Web3 changes, so if your connection changes or you're seeing there's more blocks, then run this thing. And this will run whenever the block height has changed, or have we already fetched the first fetch? And are we on real-time mode? So, I mean, the nice thing here is it ends up being pretty clean and simple on this page. You know, we just have these hooks. We can use them across the application, which is also nice. So with just this, we get this cascading state management across the application. And then you can plug those into any of the different parts of the application. And then here, we have a couple pretty simple hooks just to grab things, right? We're grabbing blocks and transactions when things change that we're dependent on. So in my opinion, it's quite elegant. And the reason why we're talking about today is just to be able to set the stage for some of the other videos in this series where we're going to do some more complex management of the transaction and the state. So this might be more of a more complex example than we'll ever get into for our application, but it does show how powerful this can be. That the cascading state changes with an application can be elegantly managed by using the useEffect hook in React. I mentioned it in the last video, but I just wanted to mention it again. So if you're new to React hooks and the useEffect hooks, so they do have great documentation, but I would really recommend going to Dan Abraham's blog, Overreacted. It's outstanding. And this particular article, A Complete Guide to useEffect, is great. It'd be hard to get to where I got to with this application and that state management without an article like this that really runs you through how hooks and this useEffect hook really works. And actually the use interval hook I got from his site as well, which also turns out to be great.